Hey guys, welcome to my latest ulez news update. And in this one, we are looking at MSM, mainstream media. Now, one of the criticisms that has been placed a lot on mainstream media is that they're not covering this issue. They're not covering it sympathetically. They appear to be biased. And to an extent, I think that, it's fair to say that, because at every single one of the now 3 major protests, anti-ulez expansion protests that I've covered in London, the BBC or ITV or any of the major news channels has not been at them. They've not covered them. They've not given them any airtime at all. And on the occasions when ulez has either come up on the news or it's come up on talk shows or discussion shows, I think it's fair to say that it feels like there's a little bit of a bias towards the plan to actually expand ulez. I don't know if that's an agenda. I don't know. I know the BBC is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be non-biased, but it does sometimes feel that. It feels like that. It feels like, any arguments against are often shut down with stronger or perceived stronger counter arguments that, are for the expansion. Now, is that fair or is that not? Well, you know what? There's a page on the BBC website, on the BBC News website, that you will need to see. The link will be in the description below, but I'm going to go through it in some detail in this video.
Brown car guy. A brown car guy.
Okay, so this is a page on the BBC News website, bbc.co.uk/news/ blah blah blah. Basically, go onto there and go into London. Go into England, go into London. I'll put the link below anyway. It was published 6 days ago. So 6 days ago, this was published on the website. And the title of this this article, this feature, whatever you want to call it, is ulez expansion, contested claims examined. So this is very interesting. So you would think that, okay, they're going to go through all the arguments against and they're probably going to try and shoot them down. But actually, it's actually very, very fair. And a lot of it comes out in favor of the arguments against the ulez expansion. It's by somebody called Yasmin Rufu at BBC News, and so what it does, it gives a headline for each of these issues and then it examines them. So for example, let's go through them. So the first one is, not enough notice has been given. And I've said this quite a lot. Considering that when it was first mooted, to when the consultation happened, to when the consultation closed, to when they decided that they're going to go ahead with it in November of last year, and actually not even a year later, in August of 2023, they said it's actually going to happen. That's less than a year, considering all the problems that people are having right now. Less than a year's notice to tell people that they have to change to ulez cars is completely unacceptable. So what did the BBC say? Opposition from Liberal Democrats and some Labour councils and MPs focuses on the argument that people need more time to swap their vehicles to compliant ones. And it talks about how the fact that, it was announced at the end of November and it only gave people 9 months notice. And it does say that the previous ulez expansion didn't encompass, actually, that's incorrect, but went up to the North and South Circular roads, was announced in early 2019 and didn't come into force until October 2021. So that was 2.5 years notice. It's considerable. Other parts of the country also have clean air zones. In Bristol, the council submitted plans to charge polluting vehicles in February 2021, and the policy came into effect 21 months later in November 2022. So it actually concludes. So it is true to say that the latest ulez expansion is happening more quickly than the previous one in comparison to similar schemes in other cities in the UK. So BBC concedes the point. Well, this BBC article does anyway. Next point. Inflation means it's not a good time to replace a vehicle and there is a shortage of second-hand cars. And this is something that mainstream media often overlooks because maybe they don't have the specialist knowledge that people such as myself, who is a hands-on motoring journalist that monitors the market really fairly regularly. And I can tell people, look, there aren't enough cars in the market. There aren't enough used cars in the market. There aren't enough ulez-compliant cars in the market. And what they are, the prices are going crazy. Well, the BBC is actually backing that up. they're talking about inflation. Inflation, well, I'm not going to look at this 6 days old news, and I heard on the radio today it's gone back up again. So let's not look at those figures, but let's look at what it says regarding cars. The cost of second-hand cars has also risen. According to data from Auto Trader, the median price of a ulez-compliant vehicle now this thing I have a little bit of thing with, because they talk about where it was 13 grand before pre-pandemic, and now it's up to over 18,000 pounds. But that's a general thing, and that could actually encompass some cars that actually are non-ulez. So, for example, some diesels. However, it goes further. Auto Trader's analysis in February shows that there were 43,359 ulez-compliant cars for sale in London, with an average cost of £15,000 for petrol and 19,991 for diesel. Wow, so if you want to replace your diesel SUV, you are having to drum up 20k to do that. If you want to replace your petrol car, you're talking about 15k. This is the average price of the ulez compliant cars that were for sale in the London area. Only about 5,000 of these cars are under £5,000. Expand that net out a bit further. So they say within a 100-mile radius of London, there are about 90,000 compliant petrol cars, 8,000 of which cost under £5,000, but still only 8,000. Now, the Mayor of London says there are 200,000 non-compliant vehicles on the road, and it's estimated that 30,000 of those are vans. So this directly affects potentially small businesses that operate in London. Now, Auto Trader says that there are only 5,181 vans for sale across London, and only 23,803 across the UK, which of these are all ulez compliant vans. So it concludes, so it is true to say that with a year, compared to a year ago, it is harder for people to replace their vehicles because there's a shortage of affordable and compliant second-hand cars. The ulez expansion will drastically improve air quality. This is an interesting one. It gets very convoluted, and they don't actually give a clear conclusion on this one. But what it says, so it's quite weird, because it says according to TfL data, road transport accounts for 44% of nitrogen oxide emissions or NOx emissions, 31% of PM 2.5 particulate matter, and 28% of CO2. I mean, only a third of PM, and we're being hit by this over and over again over our heads. Particulate matter from cars only contributes a third of that. And the proposed London-wide ulez is expected to reduce the NOx emissions by 5.4%, 362 tons in London, and there's expected to be 1.5%, 7.8 ton reduction in PM2 emissions from road transport. So data from City Hall reviewed by Imperial College London. Now, the Imperial College, I gotta say, I'm beginning to wonder if there's some sort of a collusion going on, because all of the data that seems to support the mayor seems to come from Imperial College, whereas everywhere else it doesn't. So Imperial College data shows road transport NOx emissions for all vehicles expected to reduce by 5.5%, 214 tons in the non-Greater London area in 2023, compared to a scenario where there was no ulez expansion. The equivalent figure for road transport is 2.5, PM 2.5 is 1.4%, 3.5 tons. For PM 10, there's a 0.9% reduction. I mean, these figures are not great, are they? But then it says that, then the BBC report says that, of course, not everyone will believe this modelling. City Hall conservatives have highlighted an independent assessment that says the ulez expansion will result in a minor reduction in NOx exposure of about 1.3% or less. And they go, what independent assessment? And you click on that link where it says independent assessment, there's a link to it, and it links to the Jacobs report. The Jacobs report was actually the one that was commissioned by TfL. So it's not an independent assessment, it was an assessment that was commissioned by Transport for London. So it's Transport for London's own report. So basically now what you have is Transport for London's report done by Jacob, but commissioned by Transport for London, paid for by Transport for London, that says there's a negligible impact of the ulez expansion. And then you have Imperial College saying, oh no, we think it's a little bit more than that. What's going on here, So some critics, as they say that it's not worth doing it. Like I say, it's not worth doing it, right? But City Hall and health experts say that there's no safe level of pollution. What? I mean, you're going to have pollution. What do you mean there's no safe level of pollution? So that means you're just going to keep going until there's no pollution? Well, if there's no pollution, that means that there's no human activity at all. That's the only way you can have no pollution. So let's just scrap humanity. Then you'll have no pollution. And then it will be safe for humanity, which doesn't exist anymore because we scrapped it. This doesn't make any sense. And there is nowhere in London that meets the WHO World Health Organization air quality guidelines. They keep saying that. But in my last ulez news update, if you saw that, I did actually put up a slideshow of about well over 3 weeks worth of monitoring from IKEA and on the other side of the North Circular Road. So actually on the North Circular Road, and it was predominantly green, occasionally in the yellow. So, I mean, and that's covering NOx and CO2 and particulates. That covers everything. That's all in there. And it's, anyway. 4,000 Londoners die prematurely each year due to toxic air. This is a thing that I've discussed in a couple of videos of mine as well. The first time that I looked up this figure, again, it was from Imperial College, and it completely flummoxed me, and I had to kind of try and read it a couple of times to understand it. And what I could understand was that, there is no 4,000 figure. The 4,000 figure is extrapolated. What they say that basically we estimate that by doing what we're doing, we're going to add 5 to 6 months of extra life onto the end of everybody's life. And if you think the average lifespan of people in the UK is 85 years, that means that when you're 85, you'll have another 6 months. That's great. So what they then do is they take a sample of a year, so say 2013, and they work out how many people that relates to, and then they pull that figure together and they go, oh, that relates to 4,000 people. So it doesn't actually relate to, there's no 4,000 people. It's an extrapolated figure. So what does the BBC say? Well, they've highlighted the same research, the 3,600 to 4,100 premature deaths, which is what the mayor keeps quoting. This is an estimate of the number of people whose lives are shortened due to air pollution. So how do you get to that figure? Okay, there's a lot of confusing formulaic calculation figures which I cannot even say out loud. So I'm going to put them on the screen. You can make of them what you want. If you're going to go and do your own calculations and stuff like that, that's what they're doing. That's how they work it out. But, and they come to 4,000. So what does the BBC report actually say? And so, I'm just going to the end of that bit. And so, the often quoted 4,000 attributable deaths in London is best seen as a statistical construct to try to make the impact of pollution easier to understand. Easier to understand for morons like us people, the people that live in London and the people that voted for the mayor. We're so idiots, we're so stupid that we have to be told 4,000 people are going to die for us to be able to understand pollution. Because we don't understand pollution, they've given us that figure to scare us, basically, even though that isn't actually a real figure, because it is a statistical construct. I like that phrase, statistical construct. That's what we're going to call it from now on. It's a statistical construct. It's not a real figure. Over 1 million people outside London will be affected, and there is no support for them. Data from the DVLA analysed by the Liberal Democrats, Lib Dems are getting in on the action, shows that out of the 5.8 million cars registered in the 10 counties near London, 1.6 million are not ulez compliant. Of course, it's not necessary that all that 1.6 million will come into London, but there are places where they might cross the border. And in many of the interviews that I've done in the protest, people saying, look, I live just outside the zone, but my parents are inside the zone, I'm a care worker or a social carer, how am I going to visit them, blah blah blah. So and there's also, as somebody pointed out in a previous protest, there's a couple of dog legs around that map which basically cut into those counties. So literally, like if you live in a county and you want to go from this side to this side of the county, you have to go all the way around that dog leg if you're going to try not to pay the £12.50. Going across, which is probably what you would have normally done, means that you would have to pay the £12.50. So in which case it would affect you if you have a non-ulez compliant car. So let's just conclude with what they said. So they say, so it is true to say there is no financial support for the people living near London to replace their non-compliant vehicles. Of course, don't forget, the people living in London didn't get a say in voting or not voting for the mayor, and they didn't get a say in the consultation process, and yet they're going to be hit by this as well. The scrappage scheme is the biggest ever in the UK. First of all, I hate scrappage schemes. This is me talking now. I hate scrappage schemes. I will not encourage you to scrap your car. I think scrappage schemes are actually environmentally unfriendly because you take perfectly serviceable cars. If the car is gone, if it's dead, fine. If the car is at the end of its life cycle, fine. But even then, I wouldn't say scrap it. I would say take it to a breaker because there may be parts and bits and pieces of that car that can actually be used to keep other cars on the road. And of course, the longer you keep a car on the road, the more environmentally friendly it actually is because it's already used up the resources to be created. And the longer that it's used, the less carbon footprint it actually is actually making compared to say a brand new car that you bring in with nearly 6-ton carbon footprint on a normal ICE car and up to 26 or more tons of carbon footprint for an EV. The scrappage scheme that launched in February 29 consisted of a £61 million fund. This is the original scrappage scheme that killed off so many great cars, let's be honest. I've done another video on this channel where I talk about all the cars that were killed off by that scrappage scheme, and it brings tears to my eyes. Further 110 million was added to the scheme on the 30th of February, bringing it to 181 million. So that was a £181 million scheme. That was the original scheme. The money for the scrappage scheme in London comes entirely from TfL, which is a government-funded body. However, in this instance, the 110 million given to the scheme for the current scrappage scheme for TfL, which is paying for it, but that 110 million didn't come from the government. It came from the Greater London authorities. It came from GLA. The 181 million pound figure compares with, so if you take not that figure but the previous 181 million pound figure, then you're comparing it with say the 42 million pound scrappage scheme that happened in Bristol and the 10 million pound scrappage scheme that happened in Birmingham. So on the face of it, as the BBC points out, if you just look at those numbers, then it would seem that yes, the London scheme is the biggest scheme. However, it points out that Bristol's population is about 500,000 people compared to 9 million people in London. So if you break it down in terms of population, for the London scheme to be equal to the Bristol scheme, for example, it would actually be nearer to 370 million pounds. So on a per person basis, it's not actually the biggest one. The government has the power to stop the expansion. So this was actually became a big thing a few weeks ago when thought, oh yeah, Downing Street is going to veto this thing. And indeed, according to Section 143 of the Greater London Authority Act 1999, the government has the power to force the mayor to change his transport strategy if any element is inconsistent with the national policies relating to transport and is viewed damaging to anywhere outside of London. And of course, it could be argued that this is damaging to the home counties, which are places outside of London, and the transport policy will impact the rest of the country because this is London, it's the capital. People come from all over the country to the capital. While there is this is again quoting from this, while there is a particular impact from ulez on the counties surrounding the capital, in practice there would appear to be a number of reasons why the government would not block the expansion. The main reason is transport and air quality are devolved areas, and they're devolved because they decided that they should be devised and championed in practice at a local level. So any measure taken by the government in relation to London would, City Hall argues, involve preventing all cities from charging people to drive within their boundaries. So what's happening is, what that means is, what they're saying is that Downing Street won't intervene because Downing Street feels that if they intervene in London and they say no, you can't do this, then effectively they're shutting that possibility for all the other cities, which again I don't agree with, because we're telling Downing Street to intervene in the expansion, not in the original ulez. The original ulez will stay. So that doesn't actually shut down the possibility of other cities having the central London or the central city ulez type zones. So, but anyway, the BBC report concludes that it's extremely unlikely that Downing Street will intervene. The legal challenge against ulez can succeed is the subheading for this section. Four Conservative controlled London boroughs, Bexley, Bromley, Harrow and Hillingdon, and Tory-run and Surrey County Council are trying to halt the expanded ulez through an action for judicial review. The first legal hurdle to cross is for a judge to grant permission for this application to proceed and go to a hearing, and the decision for this is expected before Easter. So I've actually said this to a few people before, that it's now going to go before a judge and we won't hear anything until Easter, and then they'll tell us whether or not it's going to proceed further. Fingers crossed it is. The council's claim is on 5 grounds. Number 1, the Mayor and Transport for London did not comply with legal requirements because they treated the latest project as an extension of the existing ulez rather than a new self-standing scheme. Number 2, there has been no clear case made for the number of people who are going to be affected in Outer London who drive non-compliant vehicles. Number 3, there was a failure to consult with the authorities outside London on the proposed scrappage fund. Number 4, no proper cost-benefit analysis was done on the potential outcomes. Number 5, there are flaws in the consultation process. We've discovered that, or we've discussed that at length. So what does the BBC? The BBC says that the legal challenge could, in theory, succeed, but it would need to pass through a number of hoops, starting with getting permission from the judge for it to go to hearing. So, it's up. That one's up in the air at the moment, but yeah, praying for that one. 85% of vehicles are already ulez compliant. So this is a figure that the Mayor's office keeps telling everybody. TfL says the average 85% of vehicles observed driving in Outer London by cameras were compliant. This includes vehicles that were coming in from outside of the capital. So far, TfL and the Mayor have not provided the number and percentage of vehicles registered in Outer London that are compliant. However, there are clear signs that it is lower than 85%. So the BBC is saying this. Background documents for TfL say in large parts of Outer London, compliance is 62 to 72%. This is interesting. So there are documents, even though TfL is saying 85%, but there are other documents that say, no, actually, it's only 62 to 72%. In other words, about a third of the motorists will need to pay the charge to drive their cars. The BBC report is admitting this. Again, the Lib Dem analysis of DVLA registered vehicles suggests a quarter are non-compliant. The BBC is actually awaiting for further data from TfL and the Mayor to verify their claim fully. So 85% of compliance for vehicles owned and driven in Outer London does not seem to be supported by the available evidence. So that's a clearly saying that the Mayor is wrong on that, and that this is going to affect far more people than they're saying. And on the other hand, if you're on the flip side, if you're thinking about it, the Mayor is probably thinking, well, that's more money in the till or more fines to be paid. Let's not be cynical, or let's. Let's move on to people in Outer London are more dependent on their cars. It's something that I've been saying constantly. Outer London is a completely different case to Central and even Inner London, but certainly Central London. And now, me personally, I've always said, leave ulez where it is. I don't mind it in Central London. It makes sense in Central London. It's so well connected in terms of public transport, and you don't really need a car. You can be anywhere within 20 to 40 minutes in Central London. Here, completely different story. You need a car. So what do they say? What did the BBC say? Do they agree? With the existing ulez, only 17% of journeys are made using a car. Almost 50% are made via public transport. This is relation to the existing ulez area. However, in Outer London, 44% of trips are made using a car and only 30% are made on public transport. So you can see the huge difference there between those figures, which is what we've been saying. In 7 boroughs in London, a high percentage of journeys are made by car than the average 44%. So actually in 7 boroughs it's even higher than that. Car ownership is also much higher in Outer London. 69% of households have access to or own at least one car, compared with 42% in Inner London. So it is true that people in Outer London rely more on private vehicles. This is the most radical clean air policy in the world. Many cities are taking the step to improve air quality. While it's hard to say definitively that London is the most radical policy, it's certainly one of the most ambitious, says the BBC. Right? Apart from 2 cities in Europe, they are in a restricted category until Paris is new. Paris, I think, is going to get very draconian on this as well. So Paris policy is coming in place. The Madrid policy, since November, there has been a zero emission zone, which is about the same size as the current London ulez in Madrid. This is in Spain. However, this is interesting. However, residents within that area are given an exemption, so they can continue to use their existing car until they get a compliant one. That's not an entirely unfair thing to approach, is it? The people that live in there, we forced this on you. You don't have a compliant car. You can't afford one. We haven't given you time to change. You know what? Carry on using your car until you naturally move to a newer one. That seems a lot fairer, right? At least they could have done that here. Anyway, go check it out. The page is there on the BBC. It's surprisingly straightforward. It's surprisingly objective. It's surprisingly fair. And there's a lot of great facts and figures and statistics that you can use to further our arguments against the ulez expansion to the whole of Outer London that's happening on August 29th this year. And I'll see you at the next protest, whenever that might be.
Brown car guy.
Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video as well if you can. And while you're at it, check out these guys who also sponsor my content. I am deeply grateful to them because it helps me to buy new equipment, put fuel in the cars, and yes, buy a cup of coffee. You can do the same. Just go here or right here on YouTube. Just hit these 3 little dots down here and click on thanks. Make sure you're signed in first. My content is free, but this is how you can help me keep it that way. I may even send you a gift. Oh, by the way, watch this next.